Cartoons generally remind us of our childhood, right? The bright colors and outlandish characters usually signify kid-friendly stories. Occasionally, there are adult jokes or innuendos inserted in these kid movies, and they go over kids' heads. But cartoons don't always equal family-friendly. Sometimes parents get it all wrong. We've compiled a list of some of these cases, and you won't believe what made it on there. Before we start, be sure to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with all things movie-related. But first, can you guess what feature films these emoji are showing? Find out at the end of this video.
When it's an accident, they call it manslaughter. I think I'm gonna throw up.
Monster House. Back in 2006, the much-anticipated animated spooky project of legends Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg was released. It was their first time working together since the epic Back to the Future films. Monster House was a dark movie that would be best described by your friends as a horror movie for kids. Although the haunted house concept isn't anything new, Monster House managed to create a fresh concept that appealed to both older and younger audiences as it focuses on the point of view of the kids, especially in how the adults are dismissive of the danger the kids mention. The film does keep its young audiences in mind, however, there are plenty of moments in the films that merit some warning. There are definitely a few jump scares and scary moments that some young kids might consider too spooky. Like in the beginning of the film when the little girl's tricycle gets stuck in Mr. Nevercracker's yard and he comes running out shouting, "Get off my lawn!" Towards the end of the movie, the house actually pulls away from its foundations and chases the main characters down the street. Can you imagine how traumatic that is to see as a little kid?
Get out of here.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit? This 1988 film, directed by Robert Zemeckis, pretty much included every cartoon character ever created at some point. 140 pre-existing animated characters to be exact. Even Mickey Mouse and friends make an appearance. The film was made in the late 80s, where certain things could slide. But the scene involving Judge Doom's death is the most shocking and terrifying of all. It starts off with Christopher Lloyd's character getting run over, but it turns out he's a tomb. He then inflates himself out and his eyes pop out of his head and are replaced with crazy cartoon eyes. He also sprouts cartoon weapons from his hands as he tries to take Eddie out. But Eddie outsmarts him and he gets drenched by dip, which is turpentine, benzene, and acetone, which are all paint thinners and deadly for cartoons. We watch in horror as Judge Doom melts and screams in agony.
Take your hands off her. Do I have to kill you too?
Corpse Bride. Back to scary movies. One of our favorites is Corpse Bride. From the visionary master of stop-motion creepiness, Tim Burton, comes a sad story of true love and sacrifice. The plot involves a touching story of Victor, a lost young boy who doesn't know the first thing about love or life. His parents marry him off to Victoria, a high-born girl whose family is supposedly wealthy. They are marrying her off to Victor because they think he has money as well. Surprise, surprise, everybody's poor. While clumsy Victor goes to the forest to practice his vows, he accidentally ends up saying his vows to a corpse bride named Emily. The whole thing is super creepy, especially when she first appears. She's got a maggot living in her head, her eyeball pops out on occasion, and she lives in the land of the dead. We find out that she was murdered by Lord Barkis, who also tries to step in and murder Victor's intended, Victoria. While there is a touching plot about true love and sacrifice, there's a subplot of murder and betrayal. The overall film is much more akin to horror than it is your typical bubbly Disney tune.
Stand clear, please. Stand clear, everyone. Contact!
Fantastic Mr. Fox. Fantastic Mr. Fox is a wonderfully quirky movie, which makes sense as it is a Wes Anderson film. It stars George Clooney, who voices Mr. Fox.
I think it's time for me to give us a pep talk and explain some things.
And Meryl Streep, who plays his wife.
I'm gonna lose my temper now.
In addition to great voice acting, the writing is intelligent, the characters are believable, even though they are animated, and the visuals are stunning. But the film isn't too family-friendly in the sense that the humor is not so kid-friendly. It isn't that it's wildly inappropriate or that there is an extreme amount of curse words. There actually isn't really. The adult part about it is that the humor is very wry, so if you have a kid who enjoys witty postmodernist humor, then by all means, go ahead and watch it with your kids. They might not laugh, but if that's their jam, by all means. There isn't an insane amount of violence. There is comical fighting shown, but no blood. Mr. Fox kills chickens with his teeth, but he is a carnivore. There's also Franklin Bean, who is shown smoking constantly, and he also keeps a cellar full of hard apple cider. And the other characters drink that alcoholic cider. Aside from that, it's more than likely that younger children just won't enjoy Anderson's quirks quite yet.
In Monkeyland, we rub our bottoms together.
Huh?
MONKEYBONE. This dark comedy involves a troubled cartoonist with insomnia named Stu, played by Brendan Fraser of The Mummy and George of the Jungle fame. The cartoonist is on the brink of a big deal that will make his cartoon character, MONKEYBONE, commercially successful. Right before he asks his girlfriend to marry him, he gets into a pretty bad car accident and falls into a coma and goes into the cartoon world. This is a perfect example of how cartoons aren't always for kids. The movie seems to have been aimed at younger crowds who liked Fraser, but the content most definitely is not. While the movie is colorful and creative, the perverted monkey, dark themes, violence, and innuendos are most certainly not kid-friendly. In his journey through the cartoon world, Stu encounters some strange and evil-looking characters, including the Grim Reaper. But the worst of it is the adult issues that are presented in the film, such as death, heaven, hell, love, and libido, which is represented by his character, MONKEYBONE. The violence and innuendos in the film landed a PG-13 rating, and we think that might be a bit tame.
Hello?
Hello, Coraline.
CORALINE. From the advertising and previews of this film, it seemed that CORALINE would be child-friendly. Sure, it has a creepy sort of vibe akin to the Burton-esque movies or Harry Potter, but this is much creepier. In fact, it's downright terrifying sometimes. Think of a Hitchcock movie mixed in with a bit of the Twilight Zone. Sounds awesome, right? Well, the movie itself is spooky, just maybe not for kids under 8 years old. Coraline Jones is a curious and imaginative girl with awesome blue hair. Her ordinary world is somewhat lackluster in her eyes, and her parents are a bit neglectful. She discovers a secret door that leads into a parallel world that is everything she had hoped for. Her other parents are attentive, supportive, and warm, except for their eyes that are made of buttons. It all seems perfect until the other mother wants to sew buttons onto Coraline's eyes. When Coraline wants to go home, the other mother turns into a terrifying, creepy skeleton monster thing. The whole thing could seem pretty scary to a young kid, especially the other ghost children that have been lured into the other world. There's also the issue of the almost naked lady neighbor that could be considered inappropriate. This movie is probably best saved for older kids and fans of creepy, cool films.
Nice work, Bone Daddy.
Yeah, I guess so. Just like last year, and the year before that.
The Nightmare Before Christmas. Speaking of nightmarish and spooky, Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas set a precedent for scary stop-motion kids films. This film was unlike anything Disney had ever released. Since its debut in the 90s, the film has become a cult classic. Just think back on all the Jack Skellington swag that you've probably seen throughout the years. It's probably tons. Although it is beloved, it doesn't mean it's necessarily appropriate for all ages. The plot is a pretty harmless, slightly spooky story with a few scary undertones that might frighten some younger kiddos. The story follows Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King of Halloween Town, who year after year does the same old thing, scare and celebrate Halloween. Jack stumbles upon a warm, happy Christmas town where he discovers a whole new, charming, exciting holiday. So he plans to kidnap Sandy Claus, bring Christmas to his town, and also become Santa Claus for the night. However, the plan doesn't go so well. Although seemingly harmless, there are some scary-looking monsters and characters, like the child who has a hatchet buried in his head. And of course there is Oogie Boogie, who is a burlap sack of sorts filled with worms and creepy crawlies. We love the idea of a Halloween world, but some little kids might not. Street Fighter 2. If you grew up playing video games, then you have definitely played Street Fighter at some point in your life. Whether at an arcade or even a coin-operated laundromat, this game was everywhere. The Japanese animated film is an adaptation of the video game Street Fighter, which was also the basis for the live-action film featuring Jean-Claude Van Damme and Raul Julia. The animated movie, however, is much more faithful to the story of the video game, impressively proving that the cartoon characters are much more realistic than the live-action ones. Although the movie isn't really too much about challenging you intellectually, it does remain faithful to the game. That being said, it of course includes the violent fight sequences of the game, so chances are if you're not okay with a kid playing a violent game, you probably shouldn't watch this movie with them.
All right, but goodness knows what this will do. Whoa, 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 whoa!
Alice in Wonderland. Disney's original animated classic, Alice in Wonderland, is based on a classic children's story by Lewis Carroll. Disney presents a wonderfully colorful film that follows the misadventures of a young girl, Alice, who falls into a rabbit hole into Wonderland. Along the way, she meets some equally colorful characters that are incredibly silly and equally frustrating. But let's dive into why this movie isn't the best movie for kids. For one, Alice is out with her sister who tries to get her to read a book with her.
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
She runs off without telling anybody, talks to and leaves with strangers, eats and drinks things that may be dangerous, and doesn't really think things through. She basically does everything we would tell kids not to do. The characters she interacts with are also incredibly rude to her, unfriendly, and even hostile. The caterpillar smokes hookah and messes with her head. The Cheshire Cat gets her into trouble constantly. It's all just terrible critters. On the plus side, this could be used as a cautionary tale of what kids shouldn't do and how they shouldn't behave.
You, weenies.
Sausage Party. This one sort of threw us for a loop, so we understand if parents got confused. When you see cartoon food animated in such a cute way, it is pretty easy to assume that it's going to be a movie for kids. But unfortunately, loads of parents were sadly mistaken. Where do we even start? Perhaps the posters with the saucy innuendos? Or the actual characters that are meant to portray certain anatomical parts? And don't even get us started on the language and casual race jokes and themes that they insert into the storyline.
Sausage, control your insolent bun and cover her up already. Show some modesty, woman.
Oh! Hey, look, can we all just, calm down a notch, please? Let's try to be, amicable.
This raunchy film is hilarious, if you're into that sort of thing. Parents, please don't let your kids watch this movie. Well, there you have it, folks. These were some of the films that parents thought were kid-friendly, but were so not the case. Did you accidentally watch any of these as a kid? Or take your kids to see these movies? Are there any that we may have missed? But before you go, here is the answer to the emoji quiz. Did you get it? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.